Well, good early afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining us for Marco's second Offshore Wind Regional Collaborative Workforce Development and Educational Opportunities webinar. Today, we're happy to have Jessica Dealy from New York State Energy Research and Development, or NYSERDA. This webinar is being recorded and it'll be posted on the Marco website within the next week, and we'll be happy to share that link out to all the participants today and anyone else who's on the Marco listserv. So I'm just going to give you a brief background of what Marco is for those who may not be familiar with us. We are the Mid-Atlantic Regional Council on the Ocean, and we were formed in 2009 by a governor's agreement among New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia as a partnership to address shared regional priorities and provide a collective voice for a healthy ocean and also renewable energy and other coastal issues. For more information, you can visit our website. One of our main goals is that we convene work groups to facilitate interagency coordination across states and relevant federal agencies on various topics, as well as host the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal, where we have over 500 map layers to help decision makers make their decisions and using actionable information. We also act as a resource and information on water quality, offshore wind transmission, navigation and safety, marine habitat, and various climate change and adaptation issues, of which a lot of our topics cover more than just one of these categories and span rather the entire area of climate change, carbon, and water quality. Specifically, the Offshore Wind Regional Collaborative Work Group that is sponsoring this webinar series acts as a quarterly interagency coordination meeting space. We also do a lot of public outreach and education, including this webinar series. We're a forum for information sharing, not only amongst agencies, but amongst researchers and other industry representatives. And we also contribute information to the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal. Specifically, last year, we had a new data layer that shows all of the planned ports associated with offshore wind and offshore wind projects within the Mid-Atlantic region. So you can click on over to the portal and take a look at that port layer. So that brings me today to sorry, it's been a rough morning here with power losses. And so Jessica Dealy is going to be speaking to us today from New York State's Energy Research and Development Agency, and we're very excited to have her with us. So Jessica, I'm just going to pass it on over to you. She'll be talking about all of the different opportunities that NYSERDA has to offer.
Or just New York State offshore wind. Thanks so much, Janet. I'm sorry to hear you're impacted by the power outages and just the extreme weather happening down there.
No, it's just because I live in the middle of nowhere. It has
nothing to do. Okay.
I live in Pennsylvania. It's just I live in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, just archaic transmission systems, which is the problem across the Northeast.
That's a great lead-in.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And there it is. You all should be seeing the presentation mode side of a slide deck. And I'm going to move this board out of the way so that I can still see you all. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I know, let's see, we've got like 8 people on the line, 9 people now. To hear a little bit more about NYSERDA's role in the offshore wind space and what we are doing to help coordinate workforce development in offshore wind and just clean energy jobs in general across New York State, how we're collaborating with other states. Feel free to come off mute and interrupt me at any point, talk about things you already know or ask questions. This is a small group. It's not super formal, and I'm happy to go deeper into any subject. Also, apologies for the folks in the line that are very familiar with NYSERDA and offshore wind because I give a little bit of a background before going into newer, more specific details. But as we get started, look at this cool picture I put up on the slide deck. This is actually one of the South Fork Wind Farm turbines being constructed, which was being constructed over the last 2 years. It's now fully operational, has met peak power. Off the coast of Montauk. It's one of the first commercial scale, it is the first commercial scale offshore wind farm in the United States. It's just 12 turbines, 12 11 megawatt turbines built by Ørsted. It was a Long Island Power Authority contract, by the way, and it was because just like what Janet is experiencing, we needed more electricity getting out into Long Island as soon as possible, and offshore wind was the way to do it. So that's our first wind farm. We've got some cool pictures from it throughout the presentation. The agenda today, another cool picture from South Fork. That is the offshore wind substation being connected. That substation was actually built in Texas. So full US product made and then transported up and connected into the South Fork Wind Farm. I thought we would go over a little bit today about who NYSERDA is, what our current state of offshore wind is looking like across New York State, and then what we're doing to try to drive up the workforce in New York State and across the region so that we are staffing these projects with local individuals, especially individuals that have historically not received notice or resources to realize opportunities in the clean energy or just workforce space in general. So who is, oh, it doesn't look like it's advancing on that screen. Is it not? There it goes. Okay. So you all should be seeing now that substation that I was mentioning in the brief agenda. And now here is our strategic focus areas. NYSERDA is building an inclusive clean energy economy. Again, one of our main focuses is making sure that we are staffing all of our clean energy projects with well-trained, safe workforces from local communities where these projects are being built. We are extremely invested in accelerating the transition from fossil fuel natural gas to a low carbon future and making sure that communities across New York State have healthy, resilient environments and infrastructure. So looking now at the Climate Act, what are the main things, let's see, resume slideshow. One of the main things that NYSERDA is responsible for is being the administrator to the Climate Act, which was passed in 2019. It was one of the most aggressive climate laws ever enacted. It puts us on a path to reach 100% zero emission electricity by 2040 and puts us on a path for carbon neutrality. But it also, because if you notice in the name, Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act marries environmental justice and a just transition with New York State's clean energy transition. And what that means is we are specifically making sure that at least 40% of clean energy spend, clean energy benefits go into areas that are designated as disadvantaged communities, which compromise a disadvantaged community takes into account about 45 different indicators, whether it's vulnerability to climate change and weather, or it is economic, racial data looking at different indicators that were built together by the Climate Justice Working Group, which was comprised of labor, Department of Health, state agencies, and community members. It took them about 3 years to come up with what a disadvantaged community is. It's really important work as we progress our clean energy targets to make sure that we are undoing the historic racism and historic injustices that have been attached to energy development in the past and just climate change in general. And we proceed forward in a new and more just manner, without leaving behind, of course, workers that are working in the fossil fuel industry, making sure that we're keeping them in mind. Here's the Climate Act targets broken down for you a little bit more. I work specifically on the offshore wind team. And what that means is we are trying to achieve 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035. But NYSERDA also has teams working on distributed solar, storage, buildings, and transportation. Just to put into reference, 9,000 megawatts or 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035 is about 30% of New York State's current electricity load and brings in billions into infrastructure. Here's how we stack up to the region. These are all of the lease areas in the Northeast and where they currently stand, although this map has not been updated to include New Jersey's contracts just yet. So for New York State, currently under contract, we have Empire Wind 1. They are in the navy blue, and we have Sunrise Wind, also in navy blue, and South Fork Wind Farm, which is currently already in operation. And you can see where New York State's goal is in comparison to the rest of the Northeast and all the way down into the Virginia area. New York is at 9,000. New Jersey has 11,000 megawatts. Maryland 8,500. North Carolina 8,000. So you can really see all of the coastal states really committing to offshore wind and also committing to growing the industry in the United States. So going into New York's offshore wind program specifically, again, we're looking at more than just electrons, more than just clean electrons here. We could do it really quickly and just use the European market to connect clean energy as fast and cheaply as possible. But again, we're really interested in growing the economy and bringing communities along with us as these clean energy projects are developed. And we also want to make sure that these projects are developed in the most environmentally responsible manner possible. And that includes permitting and research innovation efforts across the board. So let's talk a little bit about how New York State procures offshore wind. We issue competitive solicitations for offshore wind, and we've been doing so since 2018, since the Climate Act was put into law. We're now on our 5th offshore wind solicitation that was issued back on July 17th. We received 25 bids from 4 different offshore wind developers that are currently under evaluation. And when I mean we're evaluating, we have a scoring committee that looks at all aspects of the bid and scores it by the following criteria. So we score it 70% by price to make sure that we are taking ratepayers into account and finding the most affordable projects for our electricity ratepayers as possible. But we also take into account 20% of economic benefits into New York State and 10% viability, meaning is this project really going to happen? Is it far enough along? We have important contractual provisions once we select the projects based on those criterias. To ensure that investment is going into regional wildlife and fishery monitoring, that there's a minimum purchase of 120,000 per megawatt of U.S. iron and steel to help ramp up that industry in the United States. We also have labor laws in place in New York that require the construction of these projects to be completed under project labor agreements and with labor peace agreements. And developers are required to keep updated and report out on their environmental and fisheries mitigation plans, stakeholder engagement plans, and key to this discussion today, the workforce plans. Here's a quick look at the timeline, bringing you up to kind of the present date of what we've done thus far. If you haven't been keeping track of all of NYSERDA's offshore wind procurements. So in 2017, way back when the state first said, okay, let's get 2.4 gigawatts or 2,400 megawatts of offshore wind by 2030, a baby goal. And we issued our first solicitation. NYSERDA issued its first solicitation in 2018. By 2019, when that Climate Act I just mentioned was passed, we increased how much we were trying to build in New York State to 9 gigawatts by 2035. And that is when we first contracted the Empire Wind and Sunrise Wind projects. In our first solicitation, when we were brand new to doing this, and each time we do a new solicitation, we've learned a little bit more about incentives, about how developers work, how to bring community input better into these projects, what investments into the workforce and supply chain are actually valuable and what may be perceived as token. And we're able to incorporate that into our solicitations, get a little bit smarter so that we can actually evaluate the true economic benefits and true numbers projected by these projects. We issued our second solicitation in 2020. And we were awarding then at the time Empire Wind 2 and Beacon Wind, as well as grant funding into a couple of our New York State ports, South Brooklyn Marine Terminal and the Port of Albany. By the time we got into our third solicitation, the market was demonstrably different than it was in 2019. And you can probably guess why. We had gone through a pandemic and Russia had invaded Ukraine, which changed the energy landscape of Europe. And we started to see European developers switching over to renewable energy so that they were not importing Russian natural gas and dependent on Russia for energy fuel. What that meant is the European supply chain was, almost non-existent. It was very much so purchased by Europe. Prices had gone up, and just prices in general, interest rates because of the pandemic had gone up. And so therefore our first contracts were really going through the ringer, and developers were coming to NYSERDA and telling us that they could no longer make the prices that they bid into our 2019, 2020 and 2021 solicitations. They couldn't make those feasible anymore. So the Public Service Commission of New York State said we needed to, that we could not just increase the price of those projects without going back into new solicitations, which is exactly what we did. In 2023, we took in a bunch of new projects that had not been contracted before, but we had to reissue an accelerated procurement for the developers who were struggling from our first and second awards and allow them to resubmit or break their contracts with New York State. The result of that was that our second wave of projects, the Empire Wind 2 and the Beacon Wind projects, broke their contracts with the state, said they wanted to continue working on them before rebidding on project prices, but the Empire Wind 1 project and the Sunrise Wind project were able to rebid and were successfully recontracted just this year. So they never saw really a hiccup in their timeline, but we certainly had to do a lot of work on the back end to make sure that the project prices and the contracting stayed true to our competitive solicitation process. And those 2023 projects that we awarded, the three projects, unfortunately, were not able to conclude with a signing of a contract. So where we stand now, long story short, is we have two projects under contract. That's the Empire Wind 1 and the Sunrise Wind project. They're currently both under construction. Here's a quick look at a map kind of depicting those projects even better. Empire Wind 1 is going to be connecting into Brooklyn at the Gowanus substation, utilizing the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal there. And Sunrise Wind is operating out of Port Jefferson and is connecting into Long Island at the East Hampton substation, the Holbrook substation, and is utilizing the Port of Queens actually right now to stage some manufactured concrete platforms and anode cages. Anode cages are actually just these huge metal cages that wrap around the foundation to attract rust under the water so that the structure actually doesn't rust. And luckily, both those anode cages and concrete platforms that are where the turbine techs kind of board the turbine are all manufactured in New York State, in Western New York, and up at the Port of Queens. So just talking about our offshore wind portfolio in general, as I mentioned, we have one operating project, 5 projects in active development, but 2 projects under contract. We have supply chain and port infrastructure investments, not only in Brooklyn, where the Empire Wind 1 project is connecting, but also in the Capital Region. especially the Port of Queens, which is really a sight right now if you're able to see any pictures lately from that port. We have hundreds of New York State family-sustaining jobs associated with these projects, millions of dollars earmarked for regional environmental and fisheries monitor, and millions of dollars in community-focused investments into New York's disadvantaged communities. At the bottom of this slide, you see some project milestones. Being that the BOEM and the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management, which I'm sure the Marco is familiar with, approved Empire Wind's construction and operation plan early this year, and then they subsequently approved Sunrise Wind's construction and operation plan in June. And what that means, once your COP is approved, that you can start construction. So both of those projects have proceeded on with their project labor agreements being signed and are progressing work currently on their ports and their onshore interconnection paths and starting their offshore work soon. Here's a look ahead at next year for NYSERDA's offshore wind solicitations. You can see where we are. My computer just let me know that it wants to restart, so hopefully we're okay there. But looking at the next year, we're currently, like I said, evaluating the 5th round of bids, commonly known as New York 5 or ORIC RFP 24-1. We hope to announce those awards. Something that we're doing differently now is, instead of announcing the developers that we have provisionally awarded and then going through contract negotiations and then again announcing when those contracts are finalized, we are not going to publicly announce anything until those contracts are finalized. And we hope to have that happen in early or late Q1, early Q2 of next year. So that's when you'll see the announcements of this award. And again, that was for developers, 25 different bid proposals to evaluate. So quite a bit of work going on there. We are also in the process of evaluating the first round of supply chain investments. So the way the market, oh, and I still didn't advance this slide. Here's the slide that I'm talking to right now. The way the market is setting up now is that we're seeing kind of the second suppliers, tier 2 suppliers, if you will, kind of the subcontractors, the main contractors of the developers are building out their businesses faster than the main supply chain facilities. So instead of like a blade facility or a nacelle facility, tower manufacturing or cable facility being built in New York State at this time, we're seeing subcomponents, companies like Lungstrom in Western New York, who are building those anode cages, needing funding to expand because they're seeing a lot more contracts right now. So we made up to $200 million for manufacturing facilities and infrastructure available to the market earlier this year, and plan to announce awards associated with that up to $200 million worth of funding by early Q1 next year. So that'll give the market some certainty in what's stacking up in New York State. And then we are planning to issue a port RFQL for at least $300 million worth of funding to attract those major manufacturers. That port RFQL is expected to launch any day now. You'll see a big press release for it. And that will be when we'll see which ports qualify for at least that $300 million worth of funding that New York State's putting out into the market. And this is a big deal because this informs the workforce. If we are expanding out in Western New York to build subcomponents, or if we're seeing whatever type of facility set up in the capital region or out on Long Island, you know, that'll inform where we need a little bit more training associated with those facilities. Now, the other thing that's going on looking further ahead is our master plan study. It is a strategic document that takes us to 9 gigawatts, looks at where the market is now, and looks at where we could go if we go beyond that. We're releasing a suite of technical studies. The first round of studies should be released as soon as possible. You know, we're looking at that they are complete, so we're looking at our governor's office recommendations for when to release those studies, end of this year, early next year. Keep your eyes peeled for that, but those studies greatly inform, you know, what we're doing, what the market is saying, and what the needs are. New York State's also trying to figure out our transmission, right? So we have the NYSO, which is our independent system operator, going through a PPTN process, which is essentially choosing who is going to build the transmission into New York City. We are very limited on where these projects can connect into the city, and we are working through the complicated process of selecting the entity that would make connections possible for many projects across the state. The result of that, where those projects can connect, who they can work with, will be incorporated into our next solicitation. So we wouldn't release our next solicitation, New York 6, until we have the answer on the NYSERDA PPTN process, that transmission decision. And again, we continue to gather further information based on the market on how to better equip our next solicitation. So that is kind of where we are in New York State, where we are with our solicitations, how we're building the market, what our general goals are, and what our strategy is over the next couple of years. And so we can advance now into talking specifically about our offshore wind workforce. I want to first draw your attention to the New York State Clean Energy report for 2023, because you can't really talk about offshore wind jobs without also talking about just the clean energy jobs, because the majority of jobs that we need to train for and make sure that we are doing a better job of staffing up are also related to other forms of clean energy construction and maintenance. So we need a lot of electricians, we need a lot of welders and crane operators, and that's not necessarily just specific to offshore wind. So here's a few things that were found in our latest clean energy report. We saw New York's clean energy sector be on par with the national clean energy average, and it actually surpassed other regional clean energy economies. So growing very fast here in New York State. It grew faster than the New York regular average economy and other industries, including finance and insurance. We saw that a lot of the clean energy jobs are located within disadvantaged communities, which means we need to make sure that the people living within those areas designated as disadvantaged communities have access to training and opportunities associated with those employment numbers. I want to say, just generally calling out, that since 2019, wind energy jobs, both onshore and offshore across the state, have increased by nearly 1,000 new workers. And that's just specific to the development of offshore wind in general. That's through 2022. So that hasn't even included 2023, which saw quite a boom in the construction efforts of our offshore wind projects. Looking at the counties across New York State that we know we have the highest concentration of clean energy workers and where we're going to see that growth continue. This makes great sense with the map I showed you of our projects and what we've seen set up in Western New York, where that company Lungstrom is manufacturing a lot of the subcomponent pieces. Most of the employment is happening in New York County, Suffolk County, Nassau County, and Queens County. So essentially the city and Long Island, but you do see some clean energy employment, especially upstate in the capital region and in Western New York. Something important to highlight, if you haven't seen the map of where New York State disadvantaged communities are located, here it is. They're highlighted in green there. And we counted all of the different training programs associated with clean energy. So not just offshore wind, but we found that there were over 1,700 different training programs in 2023. And those are programs that offer the most common clean energy occupations, like registered apprentice programs, trainings relevant to electrification, items like that. Now, most rural areas, what we're seeing, have few to no clean energy training programs. So further analysis is going on to map how to get training into the rural areas, or at least transportation to training. And we saw, luckily though, where jobs are growing in disadvantaged communities around New York City, Buffalo, Albany, Syracuse, and Rochester, we have a large number of nearby training programs, which means we don't have to build from greenfield. We don't need to build and spend time building new structures and reinventing the wheel. We can invest in existing training programs that are already working and trusted by these communities. Talking about the numbers just for offshore wind alone, we've seen millions in public and private workforce development commitments come through with just our two projects alone. Um, and with our public funding, we have 20 million of offshore wind training institute funds that's meant to educate 2,500 New York workers. We split that funding. NYSERDA split that 20 million with our state university, the SUNY schools, who have awarded their full 10 million to 23 new programs associated with the SUNY campuses. And NYSERDA has awarded 5 different funding groups thus far associated with our 10 million going to vocational schools and labor trade training institutions associated with offshore wind programs like the iron workers and the painters, structural steel workers, and our Hudson Valley Community College and LaGuardia Community College. Also, the city universities of New York have received 10 million, built their own bridges to offshore wind program, and really broken apart across several community colleges there to take into account their expertise, whether it's maritime courses, engineering courses, or safety training. We've seen 40 million in private investments into offshore wind workforce development. And one of the things that NYSERDA does really well is help to build partnerships, convene, and inform. So what we've been doing is a lot of academia, labor, and disadvantaged community events, convening research focus groups, keeping people involved and informed in our efforts. Here's a couple of examples of that. These labor learning days or union apprenticeship awareness days, whatever you want to say, in disadvantaged communities where we're seeing a lot of construction, like the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal is surrounded by a neighborhood called Sunset Park in Brooklyn. It is historically a disadvantaged community, and they have flagged that while this work continues at the port, they want their community to understand how to get access into these labor unions that are doing the construction work. You know, one of the barriers to access to labor unions is just understanding when they enroll new apprentices and what the prerequisites are, or if there's a direct entry program, what is it? Where do they go? How do they sign up? So we've done labor learning days where construction is currently happening. We've already held one out on Long Island where we had over 200 community members come and meet with 15 different labor organizations that were signed on to offshore wind project labor agreements to better understand how they can sign up and get involved and find themselves in a union career. And we are about to host another Labor Learning Day in Sunset Park, November 16th. So if you know anybody in New York that would be interested in coming, we'll have direct entry programs there as well. New York State has also, NYSERDA started doing academic symposiums, which have brought together over 30 different state, city, universities, community colleges to talk about their new offshore wind programming together so that each one understands what the other is doing, internship opportunities, experience gaining opportunities. We want all of that shared and collaborated on so that we're not seeing a buildup of too much training in one location or not enough in another, and that our academic stakeholders really stay aware of what one another are doing. And of course, the other thing that NYSERDA loves to do is research. We've already published 8 studies that have informed our strategy, whether it's our gap analysis back in 2021, looking at where we were falling short on training as associated to the most needed occupations in offshore wind, or the skills analysis, which defined what skills are going to be needed in the offshore wind occupation space. Something that we're particularly proud of is our offshorewindtraining.ny.gov site. You know, when I first came here to NYSERDA about 3 years ago, and all of these new training institutions were cropping up, and people just kept asking us what the jobs are, we found a need to just create the most simple site to tell people what the jobs are, where they can find training associated with these jobs, and that's how offshorewindtraining.ny.gov was really born. You can see a couple of screenshots from the site itself, but I I do suggest, if you have time to go to the site and play around, you can break it down by project phase when you're looking at different career pathways. So from the planning and development phase all the way to the operation and maintenance phase, you'll see entry level, experienced, and advanced level jobs. And when you click on those jobs, you'll see a little bit of a description. This is the typical timeline of an offshore wind project. 10 years, from start to finish. And at each phase throughout the project, there are different jobs associated and different training needed. So whether or not you want to be on the development and research side, or you want to be on the construction side, or you want to be on the operation maintenance side, or perhaps just, or not just, but the manufacturing side. We wanted to display all of the opportunities across the board. So you can see the occupation list there. When you click on a specific job, you get even more specific job titles. And then when you click on a job title, like the one I've clicked on here, I'm particularly fond of because I'm an atmospheric scientist, and that's how I got my start in the industry. You see more typical tasks, you see a salary range, and then you see areas where you can go to receive training. So another tool that we've made available to folks looking for offshore wind specific training or more knowledge on what jobs are available in this new industry. And I'll say it's been so great that New Jersey has asked to join on with us. So we're actually in the process of bringing all of the New Jersey training institutions onto the map, and it'll soon be offshorewindtraining.org or .com. I can't remember, but we'll have all the marketing materials soon, and the old URL will redirect to the new. And I think one of my last slides here is just a reminder that through our strategy doc, all of the research we put into informing our workforce strategy, we are in the progress of publishing 3 new studies associated to workforce, which is our supply chain study, a look at our vessel study, and the workforce study, each looking at where we are in the market now, what's been built out, what programs, what supply chain partners have come to be, what the project's phases are looking like now, and what has been realized, so that we can better inform future development. And with that, I think that's it for me. Here's my email address. If you have questions, want to be connected to anybody from NYSERDA, feel free to reach out. Thank you so much to Janet and Marco for letting me talk and ramble on for 40 minutes. I hope it was interesting, and while you snacked on some lunch.
Yeah, Jessica, thank you so much. You gave us a lot of really great information. And one of the things that Marco is really trying to do right now is kind of be able to direct people exactly to websites like offshorewindtraining.newyork.gov, because we do get a lot of questions about what kind of jobs are available, how do I learn more about this? And so one of the kind of not as high priorities that the Offshore Wind Regional Collaborative has in their work plan is to also kind of track where education is occurring, so that we can kind of provide that information to folks, because a lot of times it is very overwhelming to just do a Google search and you come up with, maybe a million different hits. But Marco is definitely a center for information that's going on in the Mid-Atlantic. So I'm just going to go ahead and make the kind of, I guess, unilateral decision that we will be able to link to the offshore, your website from our website when we publish our 2024 work group updates. We'll be, I think, updating our entire website over the next few months anyway. But it's just such a great resource, and I'm really glad to see that the resources are starting to be out there.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to mention too, through our academic symposiums, we actually publish the presentations and a memo. So that is also linked on our offshore wind workforce site, the NYSERDA Offshore Wind Workforce site. So you could link to that, and it shows 23 new academic programs associated with offshore wind directly. It's a great presentation and a good resource as well if you're looking for contacts or just those programs you were mentioning that can be overwhelming to Google.
Yeah, 23 programs, that's a lot. And it's very encouraging because I feel like the more programs that spring up really highlight the interest and the need of folks wanting to get into those programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're interested in, tracking the success rate of those programs as well. So we do a lot of research and follow up to make sure that they're reaching the audiences and the folks that we really are trying to prioritize. And that, if folks are going through those trainings or getting those degrees, that they are landing jobs at the end. And a lot of that comes down to making sure that there's partnerships for experience gaining opportunities with the main developers. So we're trying a lot to match that up as well with these different programs.
That you kind of just answered my follow-up question to that was to ask if you have any success statistics yet, or if we just haven't gotten that far in the progression of the workforce.
Yeah, we don't have anything compiled fully yet. We and so many of these programs are in their first year or second year. So that workforce study though does break down all of our new programs that have cropped up, and we are asking questions on the success rates. So when that workforce study is published, associated with the strategic document, that Master Plan 2.0, we'll have that and we'll make sure to flag so we can actually see how well we're doing.
That's great. Thank you for tracking that information. I think it's going to be really important, especially for other states that are not as far ahead in the process as New York. Because as you know, Marco covers New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, and all of the different states are in kind of different stages of offshore wind development. So thank you, New York. So I'll just stop there and see if anybody else has any questions. You can either put them in the chat, or because it's a small group today, if you want to just come off mute and ask them, please feel free.
Hi, Jessica. This is Heather Clayton from the New York ISO. I wanted to thank you for doing this presentation. I really enjoyed it. I thought that everything that Janet said about the website, I second, and I'm going to share it with my friends and family. And then also, I thought that the outreach that you guys did it was in Brooklyn, where you did the labor.
Oh, the one that we've hosted thus far was out on Stony Brook University. So it was out on Long Island, but we have one coming up November 16th. It's a Saturday that we're doing in Sunset Park.
Right, Sunset Park. And so then I thought that was fantastic because I've heard from plenty of people that it's so difficult to figure out how to join, a labor union so that they can have a reliable job. So I think that's fantastic that your company was making that sort of stride. So thank you again.
Yeah, I mean, the labor unions are really open to it. It's not a problem of enrollment for the labor unions. When they do put out apprentice notice, they have lines around the block, but it's the people, it's usually the family members of people already in the labor unions or friends of friends, So when you're
Yeah.
talking about new workers and reaching workers who have historically not been reached because of systematic racism, in climate injustice, that's where they're extremely open to going into new audiences and informing, and we just have to be clear that it's not a job fair. It's but it is a great opportunity to come and meet and understand where and when to go sign up and what a typical career looks like. And communities have been really open to it and grateful for it, and it seemed to be a great model that we're going to keep repeating.
Right, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
There's a question in the chat. How can we learn when the study is released? And I'm assuming that that's referring to the Master Plan 2.0.
Yeah.
And can you tell us what website that it's likely to be posted on? And I'll just say that when Marco learns about these things, we do tend to send them out in communications to our listserv. So if you are not already signed up for Marco Communications, you can do that from our website, which is midatlanticocean.org. But Jessica, I'm sure you have some even more direct information.
Yep. We have, I'm just pulling up the website and I'm terrible at doing two things at one time. On our, here we go. That's the subset. On our NYSERDA Offshore Wind website, and this website is full of great resources, but it can be, I know, a little, trying to find the chat here, a little intimidating because, you know, things are in subsets and blah, blah, blah of the NYSERDA Offshore Wind folder. But this is the master plan phase. So, or page rather. So if you go to that, you can see the old master plan. So this is 2.0, looking at broader, deeper water. We issued Master Plan 1.0 early on when our offshore wind goals were much lower. And all of those studies are great and informative, but a little out of date now. So you can see all of the studies that are coming out with that Master Plan 2.0, and there will be a big governor's press release associated with the release of the first phase of 2.0 studies and the second phase. So if you're not on NYSERDA's email list too, that all goes out with that. And I think we'll have a webinar discussing some of the studies a couple of times. So be sure that you're on Marco's email list, be sure you're on NYSERDA's list, and be sure you know about this page. Oh, and let me, while I'm at it, when you're on NYSERDA's Offshore Wind website and you click on focus areas, if you click on workforce development, and then you click on offshore wind training opportunities, which is this, takes you to this link. That is where the slides are located from our first New York Offshore Wind Academic Symposium. So you could see more about all of those academic programs that have cropped up over the last couple of years associated with offshore wind.
Awesome. That's really great information. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? All right. Well, I would say that your presentation was so thorough and all of these resources are really great that we'll be very excited. Marco, on behalf of Marco and the Offshore Wind Regional Collaborative, we will be very excited to share this information amongst not only our listserv, but directly with our state representatives from our other Mid-Atlantic states.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much. And I'm a huge fan of Marco. I've enjoyed your work for a long time now throughout my career. So thanks for having me. And I'm always available to talk if anybody has questions.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, look for this to be posted on our website. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.